So it looks like we're live. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to this exchange. We're very happy to have you here for this evening. Let me briefly introduce the exchange of this evening. I'm Vincent Blondel. I'm the rector of UCLouvain, the University of Louvain. And back in February 2020, a few weeks before the world went into lockdown, I had the pleasure of welcoming the authorities of the College of Europe in Louvain-la-Neuve at UCLouvain. Our goal then was to launch an era of partnership between our both universities and communities. In particular, we want to do joint organization of conferences, facilitate exchange of teachers and students, as well also as a PhD opportunities for students at UCLouvain. So we're very happy that this event can now take place. And of course, at that time, back at that time, we were not expecting what's happening now to have this conference in virtual mode. And I'm very delighted to virtually welcome the rector of the College of Europe, Ms Federica Mogherini. I know that many students and teachers of the College of Europe are with us tonight, and I'd like to warmly welcome them here. I'd like also to take the opportunity to salute our alumni, and there are many who attend the prestigious classes at the College of Europe in Bruges or in Atolin. So the topic of the night, Europe, of course, and more specifically, Europe's role in the world. We are extremely lucky to be able to benefit tonight of Mrs. Mogherini insights on this matter, since before, and you know that, before becoming rector of the College of Europe, she served for 5 years as High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and also as Vice President of the European Commission. So I'd like to express my very sincere thanks to Mrs. Mogherini for her availability and for sharing the experience that this meeting promises. So I'd like also to thank the Interfaculty School in European Studies at UCLouvain and its partner for organizing this event. So I wish you all a very nice evening, and I give the floor to Benjamin Botson, our Master of Ceremonies for tonight, who will start with a presentation of Mrs. Mogherini. So excellent evening to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rector Blondel. Good evening to everyone. As Rector Blondel said, I will be the Master of Ceremony tonight. My name is Benjamin Botson. I'm academic assistant in European Union law at the School of European Studies. And the School of European Studies is co-organizing this event with the Wake Up Europe Foundation, represented tonight by Mrs. Annalisa Pires, who produced the documentary Europe at Sea that you all had the occasion to watch just a few minutes ago. And of course, we are very delighted to welcome Mrs. Mogherini with us tonight. Thanks a lot again on behalf also of the School of European Studies for being there. So, Mrs. Mogherini, as Rector Blondel said, you are now Rector of the College of Europe since September 2020, but you are also a Fellow of the Harvard Kennedy School, a member of the Board of Trustees of the International Crisis Group, a Fellow of the German Marshall Fund, and you also co-chair the UN High-Level Panel on Internal Displacement since January 2020. Of course, these are only a few of the activities that you are doing now. And we know you served as HRVP, as people in the EU bubble call it, High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, but also Vice President of the European Commission from 2014 to 2019. And prior to joining the EU, you were Italian Foreign Minister in 2014. And before that, you were already a member of the Italian Parliament, and you were already into international affairs as you were heading the Italian delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And you also, among other activities as an MP back then, coordinated the Inter-Parliamentary Group for Development Cooperation. Thanks a lot again for being with us tonight. So the people that you have now on your screen, I will shortly just introduce you who is who. So Eduardo Traversa is, Professor Eduardo Traversa is the president of the School of European Studies, and he will say a few concluding remarks at the end of this event. And you have 4 students of the Catholic University of Louvain, Clémentine, Flora, Marie, and Vincent, who are members of two student associations, one being the European Week, which organized model of EU like parliamentary like exercise, and also members of Global Initiativ, which is a student association organizing many events on international affairs on campus or virtually, of course, now at the moment. First, I will give the floor to Ms. Annalisa Piras for an exchange with Mrs. Mogherini, and then the students will ask questions. Of course, there will be a possibility afterwards to ask questions for you who watch us on YouTube or on Facebook. Just comment, put your questions on YouTube or on Facebook, and we will ask them to Mrs. Mogherini. Annalisa, the floor is yours.
Yes, well, thank you, everybody, and I'm really delighted to have had the possibility of showing again the film and having Ms. Mogherini with us, because we haven't, in fact, managed to speak since we shot the film, and it's a good occasion to take stock of what has happened since, because I had the privilege to follow the work of Federica during a very momentous period, 2016, 2017, a lot of things happened then. And you, Federica, you were working on a very ambitious piece of work, the new global strategy for the European Union, which was the first attempt since 2003 to find a way to have a united strategy in foreign policy. So that was 5 years ago, and of course, so many things have happened. I mean, we live in very fast-moving, fast-changing times. But what I was curious to ask you is if you had to say, since then, since the global strategy, what are the two things that struck you most in these 5 years, both in positive and in negative? So what good has happened since the global strategy? So what things you think have developed positively for the European Union foreign policy? And what instead you think still needs to improve quite a lot?
What a challenging question, Annalisa, as usual. It's a pleasure to see you personally, even if virtually, and it's a pleasure to join you all. Mr. Rector, it's a pleasure to join you. I can share, before we start, a little anecdote about my personal life. You have to know that when I was in university, I was considering doing an Erasmus period, which I then did in Aix-en-Provence. But my first choice actually was Louvain-la-Neuve. So I came, I visited the university, I explored the premises, I was planning moving to Belgium still then already. And then at the end of the day, I ended up in Aix-en-Provence, which is also not bad. But this gives me a hook to say how deep the roots are, my connection with your wonderful university and city.
Let me then warmly welcome you in Louvain-la-Neuve. You were there a few years ago, so we're looking forward to having you again, right? And
absolutely.
Of course, it won't be as long as it would have been at that time, but we'll be very happy to host you.
Absolutely. And let me thank you all for organizing this. I have to say, whenever I think back to that work we did with Annalisa, the documentary, the talks we had, the long time we spent together, talking, chatting, you following me in daily work. And I know I've not always been easy, and I apologize for that, but it was, as you said, complicated times. Every time I think back to that moment, and whenever I look, I watch again the movie, I have a sense of emotion, and it's really deep, because that movie, that documentary captures really different aspects of what was really in the making back then. So if I may, let me start with the praise for Annalisa's work that remains, I think, the best grasp you can get of my work back then. So thank you, Annalisa, for that, and thank you for sharing that work with the students today, and indeed both in Louvain-la-Neuve and in Bruges, and Nathalie and our students and professors are following this. And I've personally recommended them to watch the movie because I think it really says a lot about how Europe works and what are the challenges and what are also the potential solutions that Europe can offer. And you asked a very difficult question because, and you know that I like answering questions with a reflection before I answer. So this setup doesn't really allow that to happen. I would say that if you allow me to say two positive things, I know it's not all rosy, it's not all nice and going well, but this year in particular, I was very surprised by the steps that the European Union has taken, which were not to be given for granted at all. If you think of it, the European Union has no competence on health and sanitary measures at all. It's member states' competence, and yet the Union has taken courageous, risky responsibilities when it comes to how to face and handle and manage in the best possible manner, with all the limits, the pandemic crisis. And I think I was very impressed by that, because it is not usual for the European institutions to take responsibilities that do not belong to them. It's easy to say, you know, it's easy for member states to put the blame on Brussels, but it might also be easy for the European institutions to say this is a national responsibility. It's for member states to deal with that. In this case, if you think of the vaccination campaign, if you think of the solidarity mechanisms that were put in place, but even if you think of Next Generation EU, the recovery plan that was put in place, it's all new, and it was all not not on paper. It was all, you know, uncharted waters. It was all an experiment, and I was very impressed by that, and positively, because I found this extremely brave, responding to the needs of European citizens to a level that was not to be given for granted. Obviously, I see all the difficulties, I see all the shortcomings, I see the challenge of delivering now on the expectations, and this is always the big thing. But I think it was a good development, a good move. And in my experience, the only way you have to push Europe forward is through crisis and in response to crisis. If you manage to be relevant in the moment when it's needed, and I think this was good. But I'm afraid I said one thing only, even if it's composed by two. What else was striking me? Well, yes, no, one negative thing, if I can say. One negative thing happened when I was still in office, but in the very last months of my mandate. And for me, it was a painful moment. The moment when the European Council, I'll choose the words carefully, decided not to decide on the enlargement to the Balkans, and decided not to decide on opening accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. That for me was a sad moment. I am always quite diplomatic, not very diplomatic, but quite diplomatic. But that was a moment when I said that I believe that was a wrong step. And I hope that in these years we will manage to fix this, because I believe that the Western Balkans are a strategic, interesting part of Europe. And I would not even mention that as enlargement. I would say it's a unification of the continent, and the post-war reunification of the continent, because it's the most recent war that we have on European soil. So that was a sad moment for me, where I found out something that you know in principle, but in my 5 years I never experienced that. I was lucky that sometimes domestic politics calculations can prevail on long-term European interests. And that was a painful moment.
Thank you very much. And now I think we can leave it to the students to grill you on a lot of questions that I know they have.
Thanks a lot, Annalisa. Indeed, they have a lot of questions to ask. And first, they will ask a bunch of questions on the career of Mrs. Mogherini. And I will give the floor, first of all, to Flora for a first question. Flora, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Mrs. Mogherini, for being here to exchange with us. This is really an honor. So my first question to start this conference will be, how does one become High Representative of the Union?
Sorry, I missed you for 1 second. I missed the sound. I'm sorry.
My question is, how does one become High Representative of the Union?
I guess there are several patterns, several ways. Well, formally, it is quite clear. Institutionally, it is quite clear. The European Council takes a decision on the High Representative, puts it forward. It cannot, I mean, it also can be not at unanimity. In my case, there was one abstention, for example. And then you become part of the team, of the commission, and then you have to go through the hearing of the parliamentary committees, in this case AFET, the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, and then you get the confidence vote of the European Parliament. So this is the formality of it. How has it happened in practice? For me, that was a very strange sequencing of events, because I became Foreign Minister of Italy in February 2014, 22nd of February, a Saturday. I will always remember that because it was the day when Maidan was exploding and Yulia Tymoshenko was released from prison. And I was swearing in the hands of the President of the Italian Republic at the time, Giorgio Napolitano, one of my mentors, my meat, I would say, one of the big Europeans we have. And swearing in at midday, and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was in the ministry on the phone with our ambassador to Kiev to sort it out. And I think on the following Monday, so 2 days later, 1 day and a half later, I was in Brussels for an extraordinary Foreign Affairs Council. So I started in February 2014 as a foreign minister, and already in June, so a few months later, the Italian Prime Minister at the time, Matteo Renzi, raised the idea of candidating me as a High Representative. And in the very same moment, in July 2014, Italy was taking the presidency of the European Union, the rotating presidency. And so I was, as an Italian foreign minister, substituting Catherine Ashton in all foreign affairs engagement where she couldn't be present. So I was at the same time the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs since a few months, candidate to become High Representative and representing the High Representative in many different official occasions. So it was an interesting mix. It was a little bit of in Italian we say an expression that Annalisa will help me translating it in English if it's possible at all. Ero nel frullatore. I was in the midst of a turmoil. Everything was happening very fast, and crises were very serious around us. Ukraine first and foremost, but also Israel was the moment when the war on Gaza started, and so everything was piling up together. Daesh was conquering parts of Iraq, and the Yazidis tragedy was developing. All happened in those months. So how I became High Representative, I think it was because the Prime Minister of Italy at the time was extremely stubborn and believed profoundly that Europe needed a generational change. And I have criticized him afterwards for many different things, but I think that on this he was right, and he was wise. Because I was criticized and my appointment as a representative was sometimes defined back then as an appointment of someone that was too young and too inexperienced, having been in parliament for 8 years, having been minister of a G7 country, and being 41. And I remember perfectly well that I thought, well, if being young at 41 is what Europe means, then we have a problem. We have a problem. And I thought that was a good way of trying to open up the way for a new generation in institutions. And I was the youngest in the commission, and that was always striking for me. And I'm happy to see, and now we have much more diversity in generation also, representation in the institutions. But then every high representative has had, you only have 3 or 4 of them by now, a different path. Catherine Ashton was commissioner before and moved and changed portfolio. Borrell was the Spanish foreign minister, and the decision was taken, and I was in the European Council when the decision was taken, in more of in a package concept where you have the North and the South, the East and the West, and all the political spectrum of political families represented, which was also the case for me. The decision on me was taken in parallel with the decision of Donald Tusk becoming president of the European Council. So it's a mix of coincidences, political strategies and choices member states do. But it's also, I believe, the profile you build. And if I can give you an advice already now at the beginning of our conversation, no matter what happens around you, what people tell, criticism you might expose to, and focus on the quality of the work you do, because at the end of the day, this is the only thing that counts. And for me, it was good to see that also all the criticism that were there before I started dissolved after a couple of months. Because when people saw the way in which I was working, with all humility, but it's a method of work. Be serious, study your file, focus on what you have to do, and build your credibility on a daily basis. And this is not a guarantee you get there, but it's let's put it this way: if you have a chance of getting there, if you don't have that solid background, you won't make it.
Thanks a lot for these first answers. It allows us to go a bit like behind the doors and see really how it happened when you became HR VP. And I think you were mentioning the work you did as HR VP, and I think it relates well to the question that Vincent would like to ask you.
Yes, thank you, Benjamin, and really thank you, Mrs. Mogherini, for allowing us some of your time. It's a real honor to talk to you. My question is, talking about your mandate as High Representative, what would you consider being your greatest success and your biggest regret?
On the success side, I have 3. One is what you have seen in Annalisa's movie, the establishment of Sophia, Operation Sophia, for me was a big achievement. Because as an Italian, I visited Lampedusa many times. I talked to the refugees and the migrants, the survivors. I saw the pain, and I was feeling pain. Yeah, I cannot define it any way else, for a lack of reaction. And I was proud to see that in only 1 month, we managed to put vessels at sea from 23 member states quickly and saving lives. So that was one thing that I was really very proud of. The second thing is what has been always more visible, and I'm truly proud of that, is the Iran nuclear deal, obviously. But I've also been proud not only of reaching that agreement, but I've also been proud of the way in which we've managed to keep it alive when the US administration decided to withdraw from the agreement. Because if it was not for the European Union, the agreement would have been dead the following day. The Iranians would have left and it would have collapsed. So I'm proud of how we reached that agreement, and also how we managed to keep it alive, even if it's not in good shape, but it can go through intensive care now and be, let's say, in good shape again in the future, hopefully. So the idea was to keep the door open for better times to come and then recover, that kind of setup. And the third thing I'm very proud of is the work we've done on defense. And I think I've talked about that a little bit with Annalisa also. The work we've done with member states unanimously after Brexit, with the UK voting in favor of every single step we've taken, partnership with NATO. PESCO, all of that was really, really, really for me an element of pride, because I remember perfectly well, already when I had the hearing in the European Parliament, I think it was the 3rd or 4th of October 2014, I said I want to use on the field of security and defense all the instruments that are there in the treaty, which means PESCO and other things. And everybody was telling me, you're committing suicide, this is never going to happen, you should not say that, because, you know, member states will never go there. And it happened, and I was so proud we made it. It was a collective work, so I'm happy with that. Regrets, disappointments, things that, well, the dark side of Sophia, when it died, the child is still alive. That is good, because Operation Sophia was named after the child that was born on one of our vessels. But when the operation finished, I thought it was a mistake. I tried to fight to keep it alive. I didn't manage, and that was a moment of sadness and un moment d'amertume, si on peut dire comme ça en français. It was a bitter moment. And then, as I said, on the Balkans, because I had the impression, well, I would also say three negative things. On the Balkans, I think we disappointed them, and they didn't deserve it when there was this no decision. And then there was a difficult moment, very difficult moment, in 2015, 16, mainly 15, when EU member states couldn't agree on the internal solidarity mechanisms for hosting refugees. I felt ashamed. And my talks with the countries of origin and transit, with the African Union, with countries that were hosting like Jordan or Ethiopia, hundreds of thousands of refugees having GDPs that were ridiculous compared to our European ones, I really felt embarrassed about some of our internal positions. Luckily, afterwards, things went a little bit better, but that was a difficult moment.
Thanks. I think now the question that would be asked is a question that probably you expect, because it's a question that is about something that was in the headlines for quite a few weeks now, since the trip in Ankara. I will turn to Marie for this question.
Yes, thank you, Benjamin. Good evening, everyone. But first and foremost, thanks to Mrs. Mogherini for being here with us tonight. So yes, in the light of the last diplomatic protocol incident faced by both the Council and the Commission in Turkey, that brings this gender equity issue to the foreground, I want to ask you if during your mandate as HR VP, you ever feel discriminated as a woman during your representation outside the EU or maybe inside?
How much time do I have to answer that? First of all, on the case itself, I have the impression, but I don't have direct insight, so it's a personal impression I have, that there is a combination of two different factors here that have somehow piled up and multiplied. One is the gender factor. I don't see this happening with Tusk and Juncker being there. I don't think that anybody would have put Juncker on a sofa. So there is an element of gender that is there, is present, is real, and it's serious, and it's a shame. Then there's another element, that is the interinstitutional complication that the European Union has. And I've participated to many summits, and I know by experience that often, not always, depends on the partner you have on the other side, the third country you're meeting, but often the country you're meeting, the president you're meeting, has a tendency or an interest, or at least tries to divide the institutions and try to choose the interlocutor between the Commission and the Council. And you have to be first smart enough to avoid that trap, but also you have to have very solid protocol services that pay attention to every single step that is made, because in these cases, protocol is policy and politics. And, we always think of protocol as, what's on the menu of an official dinner. Even the menu of an official dinner can be political in some cases. Who sits next to the other, who should not meet. The protocol is highly political. And in normal times, things go well. With normal partners, things go well. But I can tell you, as I was saying something about the Balkans before, when I started as a representative, I started a practice of inviting for informal dinners the leaders of the 6 Western Balkan countries in Brussels for informal exchanges, just a chat. But at the beginning, deciding who was sitting next to the other in the Western Balkan countries was not self-evident at all. The language you use, the drinks you put on the table, everything has a meaning and an impact, and can spoil the results of what you do. So the protocol is not a glittery surface. It's a serious contribution to the policy. And here I have the impression that there was a gender element. There was an attempt from the Turkish side to somehow humiliate or divide the European institutions. But I have the impression that there was also maybe an underestimation from the institution services of the importance of preparing things in a very sound way. The presidents, both of them, don't have to focus on where they sit or how to react on the spot under cameras, a situation like that. They have to find everything ready and perfect from the protocol side. So this is the preamble. Did I find myself any time in difficult situations like this? I was asked several times in these weeks, and I have to say, I think I didn't. Even if I experienced in my life, in my career, in my professional life, many times an element of gender discrimination. Well, I give you an example. The criticism about me being too young to become a minister or to become a high representative was happening when the Italian prime minister was younger than me. So I always had the impression that the problem was not the age or the gender alone, was the mix of the two. A young woman triggers what I call in an unconventional manner, and Annalisa will maybe follow me on that, the "who's that girl" reaction. You remember maybe the Madonna song. You're a relatively young woman, and immediately the impression is you don't take that serious, which is a problem in our societies, a very serious problem. And yes, then I can pile up plenty of occasions in which things were not correct. It can be an interlocutor sitting across the table from you, and as he speaks to you, looks at your male colleagues sitting next to you, while he knows perfectly well that it's you leading the delegation, but still he's not used to deal with a woman in power. And I'm not so afraid of using the words woman in power. It's okay, it's responsibility. Or it can happen, it has happened to me several times, to go to the press room and a journalist asks you, why are you dressed this way today? And this is a question you don't ask to a man colleague. Or the first question of an interview. And again, don't underestimate journalists being very much gender biased, asking you, how do you do with your family and the job you're doing? Have you asked my colleagues that are men and fathers and have a family too? There's always this sense of, even when it's politically correct, there's a sense of how strange it is to have a woman in a power position. Maybe they even like it, but still, it's weird. Huh? It's an exception. It's it's a little bit of a zoo kind of feeling. You're there and you're. But I have to say, I never experienced in institutional meetings I think I never experienced, I don't recall having ever experienced a situation like the one that Ursula von der Leyen experienced in Turkey. I was never put in a situation of embarrassment of that kind. Never, neither in Europe nor abroad, never. And again, I have the impression that it's gender related, but it's also interinstitutional related. And it's a combination of the two that makes it serious, very serious.
If I may, I will ask you a question, and a follow-up question that is asked by someone on YouTube. And that person, I don't know who it is, asked, do you have any advice or suggestion for a woman like me? So the person that asked, who seeks to work in the field of international relations. I guess this is a very big question, but
yes,
key advice.
I have many advices. Yes, some of them are valid for men and women alike. Some others are more specifically targeted to women. The first advice I have is very basic, and I'm sorry for that. It's even very traditional, but we are in a university context, and you will forgive me for that. Study hard. Study hard. You have to know your file better than anybody else. And I think, Annalisa, I told you so also when we were talking about the movie and everything. The only real thing that counts is if you know things better than others. Being a man, a woman, young, old, know what you need to know. Study every single thing. Surprise your interlocutor, being it your boss, the person that is interviewing for a job, or your negotiating counterpart. Surprise them with your knowledge. Study hard. That's the first advice I can give to everybody. Study hard. You have to. Sometimes I know I'm a bit obsessed with that, but I think it's important to know the details of what you're doing. And sometimes I was even correcting the briefings I was receiving. And it might have been frustrating maybe for some of my collaborators, but it was also a sign of respect, because it was meaning that I was looking at what they were giving me and seriously going through every single line of the maybe sometimes 100 pages that I received. Study your file. Study your file, be prepared. And then to women in particular, there's another advice that I would give to all, but to women is probably more relevant. The more you know your file, the less you can, the more you can afford not caring about the judgment of others. Let it go. Criticism, bad press, polemical attitudes, let it go. You have to be waterproof. The only thing that counts is the quality of the work you're doing, and not the opinion people have of you. Don't read newspapers. Don't read newspapers for the sake of knowing what you're doing, but not read newspapers on you, for instance. Gossips, everything. Forget it. It's rubbish. The only thing you need to focus on is the quality of the work you're doing, and don't bother too much if people have sometimes bad opinions about you or biased opinion about you without even knowing. Focus only on the quality of your work, and that will pay off. That is the only thing that counts. And to women in international affairs, interested in international careers, I would say, well, first of all, be yourself. Don't think that you have to act as a man. I say this because it's true on international affairs, but it's true also in other environments, in academia, in other places. I remember perfectly well the first time I had my adult job. It was a male environment, even if quite progressive, but still very male environment. And I perfectly remember the first thing I did was I went shopping and I bought a very serious, dark-colored jackets to dress as a man. And it was probably the thing I needed to do for myself to feel comfortable in that kind of environment. But it was not correct. It was not right. Now I see it. So be yourself. Don't be afraid of smiling, showing emotions. Use empathy, because being a woman can be an asset, especially in international affairs and international relations. You can use the empathy that women can build, talking about personal issues, asking about your private lives, or establishing a connection. Also to open ways for negotiations and difficult conversations, and don't be ashamed of using emotions in international politics and relations, and they are part of life, and they can be used. And also, if I can share a little secret, and I don't know, probably Annalisa will talk also about that. Sometimes I found it useful to do what I call, in a very politically incorrect manner, but we can do it, play the blonde. Sometimes you have an interlocutor that is very hard and tough and not particularly cooperative, and then you simply smile, and it becomes difficult for certain men across the table to be hard on you, because their own prejudice makes them think that they owe you some form of respect in their own way. And sometimes you can use it for negotiating purposes. I think it's the principle of using the other's weaknesses as your strength, and playing it around. So you can sometimes, just pretend that you didn't understand it, and sorry, it's probably my fault, but I didn't get it right. So I did like that because I thought it was the right thing to do. And you know perfectly well that you're playing with that, but your interlocutor cannot say it. So sometimes you can play with the stereotypes that the others have about you. And if it's for a good purpose of a negotiation expert, as long as you know what you're doing.
Thanks for these very key advice. You were mentioning the men environment, like some areas which are still very particularly full of men. And I received a message of someone who watched the documentary who said, the picture of you entering the room with all this military stuff in the documentary is quite striking. And I think Clémentine has a question for you on this. Clémentine.
Yes, thank you, Benjamin, and thank you, Mrs. Mogherini, for being here tonight. It's such an honor to have you tonight. My question is, in the debate on the emergence of an EU army, have you ever thought that you would one day become the EU commander-in-chief?
No, I might negatively surprise you now. I'm sorry for that. I apologize, but I don't believe in a European army. I think it's a faraway vision that can be sometimes useful to keep the spirits alive. But if you think, I've done a little bit too much of defense work to think that this is realistically happening. One army means, as you said, one chief of staff, one minister. And what do you do with French, German, the Polish, the Italian, the Spanish ministers of defense, chief of staff? Do you really think that we could have this substituting national armies now or one day? I personally don't see it. I give you an example that was very striking for me in Belgium. We're here, so it's an interesting experience to share. And I was once visiting an airfield in Belgium with a Belgian commander. Very interesting visit. And I asked a very basic question that for me was banal. How do you communicate? Because you have 2/3 official languages in a country like Belgium. And the chain of command is one. You have one Belgian army, and still you have people in the army that speak different languages. The mother tongue is different. So how, I just asked the question, when you give an order, when you give an instruction, when people work among themselves, in which language do they do it? And he told me with the official answer, I think in that case, I'm afraid it was English. And then he told me something that I found really interesting. But then there are the moments of crisis, moments of fear, when you have an attack, you have a moment of an urgency, and then everybody speaks his own language. Because in the moment of danger, you don't think, if you imagine, if you are in a situation where, I don't know, your house is on fire and you shout help, you do it in your own language. You don't do it in the language your interlocutors or your audience can understand. You do it spontaneously. It's a panic reaction. And in that moment, I thought, imagine a European army with 23, 24 languages. And in the moment of crisis, an attack or an operation on the ground, which is what armies do, all the intercultural interactions that you would have there, then obviously we have that in the European operations and missions on the ground. But that are normally parts of the army that are specifically trained to be in intercultural and international contexts. But most of all, I don't see the European army happening today and tomorrow, maybe the day after tomorrow, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 generations from here, but it depends really on how many different things will happen in Europe from now to there. But what I see is really the fact that to have a European army substituting the national armies, it would also mean, for instance, that you have a European foreign policy that substitutes national foreign policies. Are we sure this is the right way to go? I am not. Personally, I'm not. And I remember, Annalisa, we talked a lot about that. Maybe it's because I was an Italian minister before and I moved from a national position to a European position. But for me, it was never about speaking with one voice. It was always emphasizing the richness of having different voices and managing to have these voices sing the same song and push in the same direction, but giving up to the diversity and the plurality also of instruments. I don't think it would be necessarily an asset. You can have national armies of the member states doing operations in different setups, which is valuable for the European Union. You can have Barkhane, France in Mali, which is good for the European Union if it's French, and it cooperates with the European Union operation on the ground, but it's French. I think you don't have to be obsessed by the Union deleting the national elements and elements. You can use them and create synergies, and that would be, I think, the ideal. So one army, I was always very angry with those that were raising this when we were doing the work on defense, because I thought it was a way of killing it. Not in the intentions. The intentions were the best ones. It was a way of supporting the European defense. But in practical terms, it was a way of scaring those that thought, okay, if we go on European defense, then I'm going to have to give up to the national defense. No, you can have the national layer, and then you can have the European layer. And I always thought the only way to get there is a step-by-step practical approach, reassuring at every step that this is not going to be meaning giving up to the national dimension at all. And so I don't see the European army coming up, but there is work unfinished on what is possible to be done with the existing treaties on the European defense, the battle groups. This is also one of the regrets I have. We didn't manage to operate them. And this would be somehow a sort of European army in action. And you can do it without any treaty changes, without giving up any nationality priority. And still it is not done yet. So I would, my approach is maybe very, pragmatic Mediterranean women practical style. First, we do the things that we can do with the things we have today, and then we move it from there. but dreaming of things that might happen one day with big revolutions and not using the instruments you have in your hands, I don't see the logic.
Thanks. And talking about army, there is we know an army dangerously approaching the Ukrainian border in Donbass, and of course Russia is a key topic to discuss. And I think Vincent, you have questions to ask, including one question that was asked on YouTube just a few minutes ago.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Benjamin. So in YouTube, it is asked that in 2014, Mrs. Mogherini, you said that Russia isn't a strategic partner anymore, it's only a strategic player. Keeping in mind the recent trip of Josep Borrell to Moscow and the way he was treated by Russian authorities, as a young European myself, I felt humiliated and offended. How to deal with Russia today, according to you?
Well, first of all, in 2014, it was more than obvious to say that Russia was not a strategic partner. I said that because still on paper it was. You know, in 2013, Russia was a strategic partner for the European Union and also for NATO. So we had a different kind of approach. And I think it would be wise to keep that in the background of our minds, that there was a time, long ago, there was a time when we thought it would have been possible to build some kind of partnerships with Russia, some form of cooperation. Obviously, this is completely out of the scope of what is possible. And this is mainly the responsibility of Putin and the decision of the Russian Federation. But at the end of the day, geography is not going to change. Russia is not going to disappear. It's still our biggest neighbor. It's there. And one day, politics and policies will change in Russia, being it 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 50 years from now, but things never stay the same. How to deal with Russia today? It's one of the most difficult things to do. And myself, I handled that very carefully, also because apart from being accused of being too young and too inexperienced, when I started, I was accused of being pro-Russian, which I always found very strange, because in the Italian political scene, I was definitely probably the one that was less pro-Russian of all the political figures you could find, because in the Italian political spectrum is more the right wing and mentioned the Northern League, or the League, or even Berlusconi's party, closer to Putin than my personal political history. So I found it really surreal to be accused by mainly EPP members of parliament of being pro-Russian, when they had the Italian party in their family that was definitely much more Russian than I was. I was never feeling myself as being pro-Russian, but I was realistic about the fact that, again, a country is not going to disappear from the map just because you don't like it. You have to deal with that. And so how to deal with that? Difficult, because Russia is a country that is facing difficulties, mainly economic difficulties. If you look at the economy of Russia, it's shrinking at a rhythm that is impressive. And it's a country that is used to be an empire, has the mentality of the empire, but has the power, economic power in particular, of medium European states. And this gap creates a problem. The gap between the self-perception and the reality is an issue. I think that one of the most interesting academic fields to explore would be the application of psychology to international politics. I think that there's a lot there to dig in. So how do you treat a former empire that has difficulties internally and externally, and still tries to project power in an aggressive manner? The way in which I tried to tackle that was a very careful, cautious, also because I had to protect the unity of the European Union, the unity on the sanctions, the unity on the policy, the unity on the support to Ukraine, and trying to select carefully different aspects of our relations with Russia. And I think this is a method that can be used on Russia, but also on China and other partners. Meaning, it's a very pragmatic approach to international relations, saying, okay, there are fields on which we definitely disagree. And we have to be crystal clear on that and tough on that. Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, human rights, democracy inside Russia, civil society, you name it. The list is long because I can talk about Georgia, Moldova, plenty of other things, Belarus, plenty of other things. Then there are things on which we disagree, but we need to talk because Russia is a strategic player. Even if it's not on our side or we don't see things in a similar way, still it's a player that you cannot ignore. And thinking that you can ignore a player just because you don't like his position is not going to work. It doesn't make the trick. And so Syria, Libya, some also gray zones, Afghanistan, maybe, could be, I don't know, other issues on which, even if you know that probably it's going to be tough, you need to have a dialogue open, at least to know what the other is doing. And this is also what NATO is doing. It's the conflicting, it's trying to contain the damage that could be there if there is a lack of communication and understanding. But then there's a third category of things on which cooperation is possible and is actually in the interest of both. The Iran nuclear deal was saved also thanks to Russia. The Arctic, the Nordic space, environmental and not only. Finland, interestingly enough, is the country that in the European Union that has the longest border with Russia and is the most pragmatic one in the dialogue with Russia. Why? Because they know they have to deal with that. So there are things that can bring us together. Organized crime, the role of the status of Jerusalem. I can list elements of things on which the European Union and Russia have the same position. And it's okay to say so, and it's okay to work on that. And this doesn't diminish at all the fact that we can be very strong and very hard on the things on which we disagree and keep the sanctions. So have parallel tracks somehow. And then there's another element, last one, which is the people to people. And I believe a lot on that. In particular, I was always impressed by the fact that at a certain moment of my mandate, I don't remember exactly what year it was, but I was looking at the numbers of the students of the Erasmus Plus, and the Russian students in Europe were the most numerous ones from outside the European Union. And I thought, this is great, because it means that we are creating the connections for the next generations to overcome the lack of understanding, the differences in values, bringing people together. It can be students, it can be young generations, it can be civil society, it can be business, it can be arts or journalism, it can be whatever, but create connections among societies, because this lays the ground for a different future to be built. Yeah. On the visit itself, it's difficult. It's difficult. The only thing I can say is that, you can, in this kind of positions, you can find yourself in situations that are unpredicted. Better to avoid that. In my case, personally, when I visited Russia as a high representative, I remember perfectly well, we prepared the visit in every single aspect and everything was agreed on before in a very detailed manner, no surprises. The rule was no surprises. But also it can happen that you're surprised by the person you're having a press conference with. And that is also personality, how you react and how strong you want to, it's, this is subjective, and I don't feel comfortable in judging the reactions, because you never know what is behind things that happen on screen.
Thanks. So now that we talked about Russia, many other powers to talk about. And I think, Marie, has a question for you that I guess Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, would have quite a clear answer to. I think you actually worked, or you knew or collaborated with Antony Blinken when he was Secretary of State under the Obama administration. Marie, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks. As we talked about the EU external action and its foreign policy, more broadly, which place, according to you, should occupy the EU between the two world giants, so the United States and China? And concerning China, we have also a question from YouTube on the operation of the Uyghurs. What is your opinion on the matter and what should the EU do?
And if I may add...
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I missed the second part of the question because as I warned you before we started, I had to move and plug in the laptop because at the end of the day, my laptop is exhausted more than me, so I had to move. So I apologize for that. I missed for one moment the sound because the battery was too low.
Yes, no problem. Yes, it was concerning China, and we have the question on the operation of the Uyghurs, and what is your opinion on the matter, and what should the EU do according to you?
And if I may add, there is also another question asking, what do you think of the Belt and Road Initiative, and especially the involvement of Italy, Greece, and other Mediterranean countries in the Belt and Road Initiative?
So we get to the tough questions now. Good. Russia was the opening. Okay, I understand. Annalisa, I thought talking to you was the toughest I could get, but it's not the case.
No. I was limited to the opening salvo and just let you get on with the students. So they've got much more tougher question than me.
Indeed. Antony Blinken, Tony Blinken, yes, we worked a little bit together, not so much actually, because indeed my interlocutor at the time was Kerry, so we didn't have constant or daily or personal contacts very often. While, for instance, the current Undersecretary of State, Wendy Sherman, is a good friend because we were negotiating on the Iran nuclear deal and then stayed in touch afterwards also when she was moving forward. And it's great to see her back in the State Department. But on China, I think that the main point here is that I think that we will need to find a way with the United States to understand if and what we can do together in this respect. The narratives are very different, and this is self-evident. The US narrative has not changed much with the change of administration, but while the European narrative has been, I would say, very tough on China in the last years of my mandate, 2018, 2019, 2019, where the European Union defined China as, among other things, a systemic rival, which is quite tough as a definition in international politics. And now, after the agreement, the investment agreement was signed with China, is likely more cooperative in terms of narrative. But I think I have the impression that the substance of the policies in the US and in Europe towards China is quite convergent, or could be quite convergent. Why so? If you apply the same kind of scheme that I was drawing on Russia to China, you find areas where you have clearly competition with China, trade, investments, economic standards, level playing field, you name it. You have elements on which you have clear, profound disagreements. The democratic system, human rights, respect of differences, it's no mystery. We are different in nature. And then you might have areas where you can have cooperation and dialogue, that it can be productive. That can be climate change. The United States have just explored that in a in a positive manner, with Kerry announcing that there is space for cooperation with China that is serious on climate change. Afghanistan, the Korean Peninsula, China can have interests that coincide with the European ones or the American ones, and can have the interest of to engage positively with that. You know, there is a fundamental difference I see between China and Russia, and that is the narrative and the approach to the narrative they have. While Russia has this post-imperial attitude of showing power and strength, China has the opposite approach to narrative. China constantly underlines that they are a developing country. They are a multilateral believer. They invest in the UN system. They are cooperative. The formula they use the most is the win-win. So they play it the opposite way in terms of narrative. And this can offer to Europe, to the United States, some space to, without blindly believing in everything that can be raised, but offer some space for cooperation in some areas. And I think that the US administration might be ready to keep the tough narrative, also because I think that Biden needs to show some continuity on some elements if he wants to keep Congress somehow quiet. And for sure, Iran is not a bipartisan issue, and other foreign policy issues, not so much. So internal domestic politics, not even to mention. So I think that he needs to highlight some continuity of narrative on some issues. And China is an easy one. And I think he would keep the tough rhetoric, but would explore the concrete possibility of doing some limited, tailored things together with China. And I think that Europe can be an interlocutor, positive interlocutor to that. Sorry, I lost the other questions in the meantime. The questions are too good and too fascinating, and then I start using too much time for answering them.
I think on the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes, the Belt and Road. I don't want to skip that because it concerns some member states, including my one, but not only. You know, I think the Belt and Road Initiative in itself can offer also some possibilities that are good. It contains also some traps. And I think European countries have the instruments to understand which are the traps and which are the possibilities, the opportunities. And in particular, the biggest, I say two main things that should be avoided. One is the debt issue. Chinese money come fast without any conditionality, but then you pay it afterwards, and this is a serious thing that African countries are finding out now because they have seen Chinese investment before. Balkan countries are starting to see, but still in the making, and I think European countries need to be careful about that. And the second thing is the security angle. There are some of the Chinese investments that touch on our strategic security infrastructures, and that should be a red line. These are the two elements. But apart from these two key elements, why not? So I think that it's not. I think it should not be a taboo. And you know, there are many countries that are having many different ties, not only with China, but think of Germany and Russia. Why not? You have plenty of business connections there, and they are risky as well. So I think it's a tricky exercise. It's extremely dangerous. Better not to go there. But if you go there, the important thing I think is to understand what kind of game you're playing. Which are the red lines, which are the risks you're facing, which are the ways in which you can contain those risks, and which are the fields in which you should not go. Again, as I said, debt and security infrastructures, including communications, strategic communications. But then I think it would be difficult to stay completely out of that. But I think it's important is to be aware of where you're going, and to put in place the countermeasures that can protect you as much as possible.
Talking about strategic communication and countermeasures, I think, Clémentine, you have a bunch of questions. Actually, you have a question on this topic, and I know that some also the people who are watching us tonight, they have also a question on the topic that you will now tell us about.
Yes, yeah, indeed, Benjamin. My question is regarding fake news, actually. The current health context has shown us that fake news and deepfakes are genuine threats really to our democracies. In that regard, isn't the EU underestimating external influences through fake news? And the questions from the public that relates to that is regarding the EU external cybersecurity strategy. According to you, what objective should the EU set, and what concrete actions can be undertook to meet those objectives? And the other one, if it's not too much, is in the context of the EU strategic autonomy debates, isn't it too late to think now of fostering the EU digital sovereignty? Thank you.
More and more challenging. I'm wondering what will come next. No, I think the European Union doesn't, and the European countries in general, don't underestimate and have not underestimated the impact of fake news, disinformation campaigns. It has been there for quite a long time. At the end of the day, it has largely determined even the Brexit. So, not to mention other crises we've faced on European soil, like Ukraine. So no, it was never underestimated. It was tackled, I think, quite on time. But it's a slippery terrain, because on one side you have to react to disinformation and preserve and protect and promote freedom of expression, free journalism, independent journalism, and it can be a slippery terrain. But in my experience, what has always worked better, especially when addressing disinformation campaigns or fake news in neighboring third countries, in the Eastern Partnership countries, or in Maghreb, or in the Arab world, what has worked always the most is two elements. Obviously, there is one element that is most immediate: the monitoring of the fake news, and addressing individually the cases where you see there is indeed a violation of the right of being informed properly of the citizens. But this is a punctual and potentially legally complicated exercise, because you can be brought to court. Well, you might have a stronger law background than me, and you know that this is a challenging exercise. Huh? But apart from that, which is important, in my experience, there are two elements that are key in facing disinformation and campaigns that are involving fake news from third countries as well. One is the proactive information campaign. Rather than waiting for negative news to come up and then trying to dismantle them, building communication campaigns about what the European Union is, what it does, without adding a political flavor to that, but simply an information. And having citizens informed is the best way to prevent them being exposed to disinformation campaigns. This is the first thing. The second one is to try and strengthen independent media. And on this, I think Annalisa can say much more than I can. But, you know, in all countries, not only outside the European Union, but also inside the European Union, guaranteeing to independent media strength space, instruments, freedom, is, to me, the best antidote we have to the spreading of fake news. And sometimes they're left alone. And so this is why I think that, well, at least for what concerned my work, which was on the external side, I cannot speak for the internal side, but I think there is a lot to do inside member states as well. But again, here I would leave it to Annalisa. she can represent me well. But on third countries, one of the biggest works that I think we need to do is to support independent media, free journalism in third countries, everywhere across the world, in particular in the European neighborhood, but also elsewhere. Supporting independent media, I think, is the best antidote we have to prevent the ground for fake news to flourish. On cyber and digital, I think that, no, it's not too late to put in place a sort of autonomy, digital autonomy of the European Union. It's, let's say that I have the impression, and I'm not an expert in the field, but I have the impression that we have a technological gap to fill. My impression is that we don't have a lack of policies, we have a lack of technologies and knowledge and competence and skills. And this is something you don't build from the institutions, you build in academia, you build in the private sector. This is something that worries me quite a lot. The dependence of the Europeans from technology, digital technology that is built elsewhere in all fields. But when it comes to the strong points of the European Union, we do have one on the digital domain, which is the normative power. Nobody as us can have and exercise the normative power in all domains, including the digital one. And I can share with you an anecdote about that. When during my mandate, the moment when the Trump administration came to office, it was very interesting because the Silicon Valley reached out to us, Brussels, saying, we don't have anybody to talk to in Washington anymore. Can we please sit together and see how can we address some of the challenges we are facing from the private sector, from the big tech companies, on which we need guidance. We need to know which are the borders of what we're doing, because we don't want to go in a terrain that is unlawful, but we don't have a set of rules and we don't have anybody setting up the rules. Can we have a discussion about that? And mainly about artificial intelligence, the weaponization of artificial intelligence, a field where nobody is exercising sovereignty, because by definition you don't have a territory, and the UN has tried, but given the role of China and Russia in the Security Council, is not necessarily the appropriate place to set up some norms and rules for the digital space. And so we started something that was called at the time the Global Tech Panel, one of the most interesting experiences of my life, because technically I was not understanding anything. For me, it was another kind of language. I mean, I use technology, but I don't understand what is behind that. But the mix of people, very high level people from all continents, and the different profiles we had at the table, tech people, but also persons like me with a political background, and even defense people, militaries, trying to understand what could have been the way to give certainty to the boundaries within which technology could expand and operate, was a very interesting exercise. And I think this is the power of Europe. We can put at the disposal of others, from Asia to the Silicon Valley, so we turn around from the Pacific to the Pacific, a set of common, clear, understandable rules within which tech activities can develop. This doesn't solve our problem in being behind on technology. But the power I see for Europeans for sure is this power to regulate, to offer the normative background. Then again, many of you might be lost within, so I'm preaching to the converted here.
Thanks. I see that we are almost already running out of time, and already apologies for those of you that were asking questions on YouTube. We won't have enough time to cover all of them, but there is one on topic maybe we didn't discuss much so far. Well, you mentioned the Operation Sophia, but there is one person asking maybe a bit provocative question about the collaboration with the Libyan authorities, and whether or not the collaboration with the Libyan authorities should be seen now, or if you see it now as a mistake for the long term. And the question is on the donation of warships. I don't know if there were any donations, but I let you answer.
With Annalisa, we've discussed this a lot. And we've discussed this a lot with member states, with the parliament, with the European Parliament, a lot with civil society, with the UN, because everything we've done with Libya, we've done it with the UN Special Envoy for Libya, because we were always trying to tackle the security or the migration-related issues, which are two different issues. In the context of the political and diplomatic negotiations that the United Nations were trying to carry on. So we always tried to be supportive, or at least not damage the diplomatic track that was happening in parallel. And we've discussed this a lot with the IOM and the UNHCR, which have been our main partners in Libya. To me, that was the starting point. And with Annalisa, we've I think reflected that a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. That is the most controversial aspect of the film. Whenever we get really criticized about the film, is about the relationship with Libya, which proves the point that you were saying before, that information is the antidote, but very often there is a lot of disinformation, and it was very hard to explain what you were trying to do and why there was a reason to do it. But it was difficult for people to understand.
Yeah, and it will remain difficult probably. But for me, if I can use this space to try and spread information, to me the starting point in 2015 was the IOM and the UNHCR in Libya, because they were not in Libya at the time. And I perfectly remember beginning of 2015 having meetings with the IOM and UNHCR and asking them to go back to Libya. Because without them, we couldn't have had any guarantee of human rights respect. And so for us, the starting point was the UN agencies going back. In that way, and I remember initially the resistance because of security reasons, understandably so. And I had to have meetings with Ban Ki-moon to ask him personally to allow IOM and UNHCR to go back to Libya. They went back to Libya, the European Union supported them going back to Libya, and that was for us the starting point in having a little guarantee. You never have guarantees in Libya. There are countries where you, as I was saying, you cannot get the illusion that Russia is going to disappear from the map. You cannot get the illusion that Libya is going to work as the Netherlands anyway. You have to deal with what you have, and you have to try to make it better, but you have to realize the reality of that. Anyway, having the UN agencies in Libya was for us a starting point to be able to operate. And how much time we have? 5 minutes. Okay, I'll try to make it short. But Annalisa tells it very well in the film. The reason why we at a certain moment started to train the Libyan Coast Guard, and then also providing them some technical equipment, ships, and even if that was done mainly by member states more than by the European Union itself, it was mainly done bilaterally. But the elements that changed the picture was when we decided to start training the Coast Guard, was in the origin of the Operation Sophia. Operation Sophia was conceived in the beginning to start in international waters, and then at a certain other phase, move into Libyan waters. Now we received the mandate, a miracle, a lot of work, a miracle result of a lot of work, of having the UN Security Council resolution mandating the European Union to operate with Operation Sophia in international waters. A lot of work. 2 visits in New York in 1 month to get that. But then to receive an invitation from the Libyan authorities to operate in Libyan waters would have been a different story. First of all, it would have meant an international discussion about the Libyan authorities, so interfering with the political track that we wanted to preserve. Second, some juridical aspects. Some of you might get it more than others. If a third actor sorry, I'm getting technical here, but you asked the question, so it's your fault. If an international player, if an international organization acts in territorial waters of another country, the judicial responsibility of what happens relates to that country. So whatever would have happened in Libyan waters with European vessels would have been to be related to the Libyan judicial authorities. Can you define the Libyan judicial authorities in 2016, 2015, 2017, 2018? Would you put your militaries, your vessels, or even the people you intercept, or the people, that are responsible for the trafficking, or the refugees or migrants themselves, in the hands of the Libyan authorities, being yourself there? Complicated. From a legal point of view, Europeans operating in Libyan waters, extremely complicated. The ones of you that have a legal background understand the complexity of that, including with the European Court. Complicated. And on top of that, who was the Libyan authority authorizing that in the first place? So to address pragmatically and practically the issue of operating in the Libyan waters, and not only in international waters where we could stay, the only way to do that was to train the Libyan Coast Guard, having a mentoring of the training somehow as an antenna. So the Europeans still keeping an eye on what the Libyan Coast Guard was doing, but remotely. So legally, the framework was respected. It was a complicated exercise, and providing some assets as well, but in a monitored situation, and with one caveat that always stayed. IOM, UNHCR, and international NGOs present in Libya and possibly on the vessels of the Coast Guard. This was the caveat. Better than that, in that conditions, we couldn't imagine. And I challenge anybody to find a better solution rather than staying in international waters and seeing people drowning in Libyan waters without being able to enter. It has been a difficult dilemma, and it's a moral dilemma. And it goes back to perfect is the enemy of good sometimes. And again, sometimes you don't have, it's difficult, but sometimes you don't have the perfect solution. You don't have the good solution. You have the best possible solution. And you hope that this would bring some positive developments on which you can build. But for us, these elements were key to have the UN and the international NGOs present all the way. That was the guiding principle. But it was but it was difficult because, yeah, you knew that you were doing some good, but not everything. And yeah, it's a difficult thing to accept. Also from a human point. I think that is reflected well in the movie.
Thank you for these thorough explanations. If we may take a couple of more minutes of your time, because Flora has a very last question to ask you, and I think it's a question also that will maybe allow you to end on a positive note and maybe to give some remarks. Well, let's see. You mentioned the normative power of the EU. Flora, what would you like to ask Ms. Mogherini?
Thank you very much. Then my question is, as we are currently facing the influence of multiple countries through the world, which have a certain level of attractivity, my question is the European way of life still the most attractive?
That's an easy question. Finally, at last, I got an easy question. You know, I've always thought that I was very privileged for many different reasons, but maybe my main privilege, and I told this to Annalise, I perfectly remember the moment when I told you this. My main privilege was that in the moment when Europe felt that it was in deep crisis, and there were, you know, a sequencing of things, the economic and financial crisis, Greece, terrorist attacks on European soil, you name it, the migration crisis, the refugee crisis. We were feeling at a certain moment, we were feeling overloaded with difficulties and we couldn't stand Brexit too much. We are collapsing. And I had the privilege of seeing Europe with the eyes of our partners outside of Europe. And the image of Europe that they were giving me was, what are you complaining about? You're still the best place in the world to live in. Economically, socially, rights. Europe is the place in the world where you have the most advanced rights on all fields, economic, social, human, everything, political, everything. Even in, you know, we always look at the United States, still there's that penalty and there's no pregnancy leave. I mean, there are some things to be looked at also there. So Europe is really, looked from the outside, is the place to be. And sometimes Europeans don't realize it because obviously we focus on what we are missing on our own problems. And indeed, we do have problems, youth unemployment, social divergences and disparities, inequalities, gender issues, we still have that inside. Some human rights and democracy shortcomings inside the European Union, a lot. But still, if you look around, tell me where else you would want to be otherwise. And this is why, you know, everybody is looking at us with a little bit of envy, and we don't realize it. In this sense, we are spoiled because we give it for granted. We have peace, we have economic growth, we have rights, we even have relatively good weather, good food, good drinks. You know, it's a good place to live. I don't know if this is a way of life, but this is for sure the achievement of a long history of culture, hard lessons we have learned through the wars. We are the continent that has lived most of the wars in the globe and even exported them quite a lot. And I think we sometimes underestimate what we have. So I don't know if it's a way of life, but I'm sure Europe is the best place to be in the world today. And we should be proud, not complacent, because we can always improve, but at least a little bit humbled and thinking twice before we disregard what we have, because all around us, not many others have even part of what we have. And I think, you know, if I can quote a song, it's a British singer, The Passenger, that I like a lot. And there's a famous song that says, "You only miss the sun when it starts to snow. You realize what you're losing only when you're losing it. But as long as you have it, you don't really see it." And I think that's it's a good quote to keep in mind.
Which are the words that you use at the end of the documentary?
Oh, thank you, Ben. I was just about to say it. So we have Federica quoting a song that is the same meaning at the end of the film, so that the circle is perfectly closed.
That I didn't remember. You see, so
you don't know what
I still keep the same mind.
Okay, watch it again.
But I watch it quite often. I watch it at least once a year. Because I find it inspiring for myself to look back at what we did.
To remember what you did. your funniest hour and your toughest hour, maybe.
Exactly. I feel a little bit released also, I have to say.
I'm sure that your life is easier now. I mean, it was very tough for me to run after you. I'm sure that it was tougher for you also to be run after by me.
You were a lovely presence all the way.
Oh, far too kind, far too kind. But I'm glad that you still think that the end of the film is really what we should think about when we think about Europe, that you don't know what you have until you've lost it. So maybe sometimes we should do more to protect it.
Rector Mogherini, thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions. I will now pass the floor to Eduardo Traversa for some concluding remarks. But first, I would like to say to Annalisa a very happy birthday from all the public.
Is it today?
Yeah.
No, you promised that you wouldn't say it, Ben. You're a liar. Yeah, it is. Thank you so much. That's a nice
Happy birthday.
Okay, all together now. Let's sing. No, joking. Thank you so much, Ben. You promised me that you wouldn't say it, though.
Happy birthday! It's a beautiful day, anyway. It's a beautiful evening. We would like it to continue forever, because to have the privilege to spend this hour and a half of very intimate conversation with Annalisa Piri and Federica Mogherini is really something that I think all of us will cherish. I won't be long. I just want to try to summarize all what we've said in 3 words, which I think reflect the action and the personality of Federica Mogherini during her mandate and even before and after. And those 3 words are integrity, dialogue, and cooperation. And these are 3 lessons of life, I think, for all the students who are with us tonight. Integrity is be what you are. You shouldn't be afraid of show what you have to show. Be prepared, work hard, be ready. Those are the words of Federica Mogherini, and especially because the exams are coming, study hard. So it's certainly an advice that I could give you for this month. And
also to my students in Bruges.
Yeah, to the students.
Exams are coming.
So integrity is fundamental, is what keeps you thriving also in difficult times. Dialogue. Interpersonal dialogue, also interinstitutional dialogue in Europe is fundamental, and is even more fundamental than unity, because as we've seen, uniformity can at the end be detrimental to unities through dialogue, that you maintain diversity and that you are able at the end to strive towards common goals while being different. And also a strength of Europe, or strength in a family, in a group of friends, a group of students, is that everyone has different qualities, and the goal is not to be all the same. Is trying also, for example, in international relation, playing with the strength of each member state to create fruitful dialogue with our neighbors. We talked about Russia, we talked about Libya, we talked about the US, China. Probably the best entry door to those countries is a different member state. So it's important to keep this diversity. Dialogue is also about information and communication, freedom of speech, one probably of the most wonderful treasure of Europe and European culture. The third word is cooperation. Cooperation is fundamental, is at the basis of European integration, is also what Europe has to do with its neighbors. You start to cooperate with your closest neighbor. Cooperation means, of course, caring and taking responsibility for other country, but it can also mean to be firm sometimes, because when you cooperate on equal footing, you respect the person or the country you have in front of you, but you also expect respect, even if and especially if you are a woman. And you keep also the dialogue open all the time. That's the sense of cooperation, even with countries that have grown in the last decades and have shown that they can become dangerous to a certain extent, but that it's not a sufficient reason not to stop the dialogue and to try to cooperate on at least some area. I'd like, and really it will be my last sentence, to conclude with a quote from an Italian political thinker, who is Niccolò Machiavelli, who said, and I'll adapt it to Federica Mogherini, is not the function that honors the woman, but the woman that honors the function. And I think the way Federica Mogherini developed her function, it's also always difficult to start in a function that is relatively new. There was just before her Catherine Ashton, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and I think the way that Federica Mogherini inhabited her function will have a lasting impact on the way Europe is developing her external policy in the world, and what can be done with neighbors, especially towards Africa, which is probably the most fundamental relationship that Europe should have in mind as regards its neighborhood policy, and should not forget, but also the way Federica Mogherini managed to keep the dialogue with different other actors within and outside Europe. So I think you really opened new ways of interpreting the external policy, a new way of being a European politician. And I think we should all thank you for that. We should thank you for being with us tonight. And thank you to Annalisa Piras. Thank you to Benjamin Botson, to our students that organized the evening from the Global Initiative and from the European Week, the School of European Studies. And let me simply wish you a wonderful evening and a future full of integrity, dialogue, and cooperation. Thank you. And good.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your kind words, for the initiative. All the best to the students. Study hard and be yourself. Do always what you think is right, not what you think is easiest. I would leave you with that. And last but not least, happy birthday, Annalisa.
Thank you so much. Lovely to see you. Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.